So, in this morning's session, we talked about how these future skills are key in establishing that why of technology use in schools. Seymour Papert famously said, "Nothing could be more absurd than an experiment in which computers are brought into schools where nothing else has changed." So, we need to look at changing approaches to teaching and learning as we bring in new devices to the schools. If we look at reports like the ISTE standards, which is the International Society for Technology and Education, they look at global trends of technology use in schools and release standards to educators to help guide the use of technology. The first standards were released in 1998, and it was seen that technology was being used. Well, we were learning to use technology, number one. So this is when the computers first started coming in, and we would have things like typing classes, and you would be teaching students how to save things to floppy disks, etc. The second set of standards was released in 2007, noting a change that technology was now primarily used to learn. So we're using technology to learn in the classroom. We see this predominantly with teachers using PowerPoints and videos to transmit information, multimedia information to students. And the most recent standards were released in 2016, noting a transformative learning with technology trends. So this is the idea that we now are moving towards one-to-one devices, and students have the power to create content for themselves and not just consume it through technology. So then we're looking at more transformative approaches to learning, things like using technology to facilitate project-based learning or blended learning models, things of that sort. Technology deployments fail 100% of the time if you just change the tool instead of the school. So if you bring in technology to a model that was used without technology, research actually shows that it can be detrimental to learning outcomes. And the BESA report last year said that over a third of devices that are in UK schools are actually obsolete or actually detrimental to learning. So what we did was just a simple activity that could be rolled out to staff at your school just to get them thinking about how they're integrating technology into teaching and learning. So in your table groups, write down 12 of the most important future skills you want your students to have. And this, of course, followed the previous session. So fresh in our mind was that World Economic Forum report and the automation graph we were looking at. So in our groups, the digital leaders brainstormed what they discussed, what they thought were the most important future skills that they hoped to encourage through the use of technology. And what it came down to were these key sorts of skills: critical thinking, collaboration, creativity, communication. Those are the 4 C's that we see a lot in education technology. What I found really interesting is this confidence piece came up quite a bit, and I think that's the GDST sort of context that actually we maybe have the 5 C's of EdTech in our schools. Emotional intelligence was another one that came up in a lot of groups as being very important. And then others such as adaptability and resilience, ingenuity, risk-taking, technical, hard ICT skills, leadership, and metacognition were what we decided were really important. So this is step 1. Step 2 is in your table groups, write down 6 things you want pupils to be able to create using technology. And I will often give some sort of prompts like this of possible multimedia projects you could get students to be creating, things like podcasts or films, coding, stop motion, etc. So again, people came up with ideas of what they want students to be creating. And then the final step in this process is individually get teachers to write down a topic you have taught within a subject, for example, or it could be a scheme of work that they're currently looking at changing. So instead of saying something like geography, which is too broad, say the Great Wall of China or a specific sort of area within the scheme of work. Don't say writing, say poetry. Don't say science, say solar energy experiments. And what we get when we put it all together is our future skills plus the digital tool plus the topic of study equals your schema work. Now, what's key here is that we're starting with the future skills. That's the important piece. And then we look at what tool might support those skills, and then what topic it may best fit into. This is a real sort of paradigm shift I found with teachers, because often we start with the topic. So, unit 1, I need to study Shakespeare. We're doing Romeo and Juliet. How might technology fit into this? Whereas if we start the other way, if we start with future skills, we could say, okay, critical thinking and creativity is what I hope to get out of Shakespeare. I'm going to look at a tool like podcasting, because I know research shows that academic speech can lead to more higher quality academic writing. So that makes sense as a tool to support my future skills. The topic just happens to be Romeo and Juliet. So it's about changing the narrative of starting with future skills instead of saying, okay, this is the topic. How does technology come into play? I saw a brilliant example of this up at Norwich with the senior maths teacher. He wanted to encourage collaboration and active learning with his students, and he thought that film might be a great place, a great tool to use, because he saw that his students really were unfamiliar with how to make any sorts of videos at all. So he really wanted to use this tool to support these future skills. The unit and topic that he applied it to just happened to be decimals and fractions. So for me as an English teacher, I didn't quite see how that all fit together, but him being the expert in mathematics saw how you could use film to make short videos of girls explaining decimals and fractions, and then posting that to a communal area where girls can actually be learning from each other. So instead of a day-to-day sort of how am I going to integrate technology into what I'm already doing, this one tweak lasted an entire unit or scheme of work and really transformed teaching and learning in his classroom. Another example is the senior techathon that Amy runs. She was looking at the future skills of collaboration and complex problem solving. How can we encourage these skills while also looking at AI, which is becoming increasingly important? And how do we apply this to make a difference in the world? Because she's not pulling from a curriculum, this sort of topic is a bit more flexible. So put together, that day is not about just technology, but actually how are we encouraging these future skills? What tool might support it? And then the topic is just what you happen to be covering. To change how tech is used in your schools, you really need to start with the why instead of the what.